My name is Lily, 35 years old, and I was standing in the middle of Terminal B at JFK, clutching a crumpled note in my hand, my suitcase wheels still warm from the sprint to the check-in counter. The hum of the airport swirled around me, announcements crackling overhead, the sharp clack of heels on polished floors, the faint whiff of overpriced coffee from a nearby kiosk. But all I could hear was the echo of my own heartbeat, pounding like a drum in my chest. The note was from Brandon, my husband of 8 years. It was short, scrawled in his familiar slanted handwriting on a torn piece of airport stationery, *, I'm not coming. I can't do this anymore. Good luck. *, that was it. No apology, no explanation, just those 3 sentences, left on the driver's seat of our rental car as he vanished into the chaos of the drop-off lane. I stood there, frozen, as travelers streamed past me, their rolling bags and hurried conversations blurring into a dull roar. My vision tunneled, the edges of the world smudging like wet ink. He'd left me. Here. Now. On the cusp of what was supposed to be our dream trip to Paris. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever faced betrayal and fought back. Your support fuels these tales of resilience. I don't know how long I stood there, the note trembling in my fingers, but it felt like hours. The weight of it was suffocating, not just the words, but what they meant. 8 years of marriage, countless compromises, shared dreams, all reduced to a scrap of paper abandoned in a parking lot. I wanted to scream, to crumple it and hurl it into the nearest trash can, but my body wouldn't move. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me back. A text from my sister, Claire, *, you guys at the gate yet? So jealous of your Paris pics already. *, I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, but no words came. How could I explain this? How could I tell her that the man I'd built my life with had just walked away without so much as a backward glance? Let's rewind. Before that moment in the airport, life with Brandon wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We lived in a cozy 2-bedroom in suburban Connecticut, the kind of place with creaky hardwood floors and a backyard just big enough for a small garden I tended obsessively. Mornings started with the hiss of the coffee maker, Brandon always pouring me a cup before himself, a quiet ritual that felt like love. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized tech firm, juggling deadlines and Zoom calls while Brandon ran his own landscaping business, his truck perpetually dusted with soil and grass clippings. We were busy, sure, but we made it work. Date nights were simple, pizza and a movie on the couch, or walks by the river, his hand warm in mine as we talked about the future. Paris was supposed to be our big moment, a celebration of 8 years together, a chance to reconnect after months of feeling like ships passing in the night. I'd planned every detail, the Seine River cruise, the tiny patisserie I'd found on Instagram, the sunset view from Montmartre. Brandon had smiled through my endless itinerary tweaks, nodding along as I pinned maps and menus to our fridge. "Whatever makes you happy, Lil," he'd say, his voice soft, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I'd grown up in a house where love was loud and chaotic, my parents' arguments shaking the walls, so Brandon's calm felt like a gift. He was my anchor, the one who'd sit with me through late-night anxieties, who'd laugh at my terrible puns, who'd leave sticky notes on the bathroom mirror when he left for early jobs. * You're killing it. Love you. * I'd sacrificed for him, too, turning down a promotion that would have meant moving to Chicago, dipping into my savings to help him buy a new work truck when his business hit a rough patch. We were a team, or so I thought. Looking back, I can see the cracks I ignored, the moments I brushed off as stress or fatigue. But in those days, I believed in us. I believed in him. The garden was my pride and joy, a patchwork of lavender and roses I'd coaxed from stubborn soil. I'd spend weekends kneeling in the dirt, my hands caked with earth, while Brandon mowed nearby, the hum of his equipment blending with the chirp of sparrows. Our neighbors, the Patels, would wave from their porch, their kids chasing each other across the lawn. "You've got a green thumb, Lily," Mrs. Patel would call, and I'd grin, brushing sweat from my brow. Inside, our home was filled with small touches of us, photos from our camping trip to Acadia, the lopsided pottery bowl I'd made in a community class, the quilt Brandon's mom had sewn for our wedding. Work was demanding, my desk cluttered with post-its and coffee mugs, but I thrived on the chaos, earning praise for keeping projects on track. Brandon's business was seasonal, so I'd handle our finances in the lean months, balancing bills with the precision of a tightrope walker. We weren't rich, but we were building something. At least, I thought we were. The idea for Paris came last winter, during a snowstorm that trapped us indoors. We'd curled up under a blanket, scrolling through travel blogs, dreaming of cobblestone streets and warm croissants. "Let's do it," Brandon had said, his voice bright with rare spontaneity. "Let's make it our thing." I'd thrown myself into planning, saving every bonus, cutting back on takeout to fund the trip. Brandon seemed on board, even picking out a leather jacket for the occasion, joking about looking European. Our friends envied us, Claire teasing that we were living the rom-com life. I felt lucky, like we were on the verge of something new, something deeper. But beneath the surface, things were shifting, and I was too busy pinning dreams to notice. It started small, the kind of things you dismiss when you trust someone. Brandon's phone would buzz late at night, and he'd angle it away, muttering about client texts. He'd come home later than usual, his clothes carrying a faint whiff of perfume I didn't recognize, chalked up to a new laundry detergent. He was quieter, too, his laughter less frequent, his sticky notes disappearing from the mirror. I'd ask if he was okay, and he'd shrug, saying, "Just work stuff, Lil. Don't worry." I didn't press. I should have. There were other signs, a receipt for a dinner I hadn't attended, tucked in his jacket pocket, a muted call he took in the garage, his voice low and urgent, the way he'd flinch when I reached for him in bed, like my touch was an intrusion. I told myself it was the stress of his business, the long hours, the winter slump. I made excuses, filling the silence with my own optimism, planning Paris like it would fix everything. Before the trip, I found something that stopped me cold. I was sorting laundry, the dryer's hum filling our quiet house, when I pulled Brandon's favorite hoodie from the basket. A small, folded piece of paper slipped out, landing on the floor. It was a hotel confirmation email, printed and creased, for a weekend in Boston, dates from 3 weeks earlier, when he'd told me he was visiting his brother in Hartford. The booking was for 2, under his name, with a woman's name I didn't recognize, Jessica Monroe. My stomach twisted, the paper trembling in my hands. I sat on the laundry room floor, the cold tiles biting through my jeans, staring at the words. It could be a mistake, I thought. A client, a friend, a mix-up. But deep down, I knew. I confronted him that night, my voice shaking as I held up the paper. "Who's Jessica?" I asked, standing in our kitchen, the clock ticking too loudly behind me. Brandon's face went blank, then hardened. "It's nothing," he said, snatching the paper. "A work thing. You're overreacting." His tone was sharp, dismissive, and it cut deeper than the lie itself. I wanted to push, to demand answers, but he walked out, slamming the garage door behind him. I stood there, the fight draining out of me, convincing myself I'd misread the situation. I didn't bring it up again. The weeks before Paris were a blur of denial and distraction. I threw myself into work, into packing, into pretending everything was fine. Brandon played along, nodding at my travel plans, but his enthusiasm felt hollow, like he was reading from a script. The night before our flight, we sat at our dining table, passports and tickets spread out between us. I tried to spark excitement, showing him a photo of the Louvre at dusk. He barely glanced at it, muttering, "Looks nice," before scrolling through his phone. I went to bed alone, the the space beside me cold, telling myself tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, we'd be in Paris, and whatever was wrong would fade under the city of light. The morning of the trip, I woke early, adrenaline buzzing. I packed our carry-ons, double-checked our tickets, and left a note for the neighbor to water my garden. Brandon was quiet, loading our bags into the rental car with mechanical precision. At the airport, he seemed distracted, checking his phone as we navigated the drop-off zone. "I'll park and meet you inside," he said, his voice clipped. I nodded, hauling my suitcase toward the terminal, the glass doors sliding open with a whoosh. I checked in, got my boarding pass, and waited by the gate, scanning the crowd for his familiar frame. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. My texts went unanswered, my calls straight to voicemail. A knot formed in my chest, tightening with each unanswered ping. Finally, I backtracked to the car, my sneakers squeaking on the pavement, and found it parked crookedly in the lot. The note was there, on the driver's seat, his handwriting unmistakable. "I'm not coming. I can't do this anymore. Good luck." The shock was physical, a punch to the gut that left me gasping. I sank into the seat, the leather still warm from his body, and read the note again, as if the words might change. They didn't. My phone buzzed, Claire again, asking for updates. I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. The airport's chaos pulsed around me, but I was alone, marooned in a moment I hadn't seen coming. Anger flared, hot and sharp, followed by a wave of grief so heavy it pinned me to the seat. 8 years. Gone. With a note. I wanted to call him, to scream, to beg for answers, but something stopped me. A small, stubborn voice in my head whispered, "You're not this person." "You don't beg." I folded the note, slipped it into my pocket, and dragged my suitcase back to the terminal. I wasn't going to Paris. Not yet. But I wasn't going to fall apart, either. The next hours were a haze. I canceled my flight, paid a fortune to retrieve the rental car, and drove home, the radio off, the silence deafening. Our house felt foreign when I walked in, the air stale, the garden mocking me with its cheerful blooms. I dropped my bags in the hall, the thud echoing, and sank onto the couch. The note sat on the coffee table, taunting me. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to understand why I hadn't seen this coming. I opened my laptop, my fingers trembling as I logged into our shared bank account. The balance was lower than it should have been, thousands lower. Recent transactions showed cash withdrawals, hotel charges, and a wire transfer to an account I didn't recognize. My heart sank. I checked his email, the password unchanged since we set it up years ago. There it was, messages to Jessica Monroe, dozens of them, stretching back months. Dinner plans, weekend getaways, promises of a new start. My hands shook as I read, each word a dagger. He'd been planning this, building a life behind my back while I planned our future. The betrayal was raw, a wound that throbbed with every discovery. But beneath the pain, something else stirred, anger, yes, but also clarity. Brandon thought he could walk away, leave me with nothing but a note, and start over without consequence. He thought I'd crumble, that I'd call and plead, that I'd fade into the background of his new life. He was wrong. I closed the laptop, my breath steadying. I wasn't going to let him erase me. Not my life, not my dreams, not my strength. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew one thing, Brandon had no idea who he'd just underestimated. The next morning, I woke with a headache and a resolve I hadn't felt in years. The house was too quiet, the absence of Brandon's morning coffee ritual a stark reminder of his betrayal. I made my own coffee, the machine sputtering as I stared out at the garden, the lavender swaying in the breeze. I needed a plan, something to anchor me in the chaos. First, I called Claire. Her voice cracked with shock as I told her about the note, the emails, the drained account. That bastard, she hissed, her anger a mirror to mine. What do you need? I'm on the next train. I asked her to come, but not yet, I needed time to think. Next, I called a locksmith, scheduling an appointment to change every lock by noon. If Brandon thought he could waltz back for his things, he'd find the door barred. I checked our credit cards, finding charges for jewelry I'd never seen, a gym membership in Boston, and more hotel stays. I froze the accounts, my fingers flying over the keyboard, each click a small act of defiance. Then I called our bank, requesting a detailed transaction history and flagging the wire transfer as suspicious. The representative's voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the sympathy in her pauses. "We'll investigate, Mrs. Carter," she said, and I flinched at the name. I wasn't sure I wanted to be Mrs. Carter anymore. By afternoon, the locksmith was at work, the drill's whine cutting through my thoughts. I paced the living room, the note still on the coffee table, its edges curling. I needed more than locked doors and frozen accounts. I needed to protect myself, to ensure Brandon couldn't walk away with everything we'd built. I called a lawyer, a woman named Rachel Kim, recommended by a colleague who'd gone through a messy divorce. Her voice was crisp, no nonsense, as she listened to my story. "We'll need to act fast," she said. "File for divorce, secure your assets, and request a forensic accountant to trace the money. Do you have evidence of the affair?" I sent her screenshots of the emails, the hotel receipt, the bank transactions. "Good," she said. "This gives us leverage. He's not as smart as he thinks." Rachel's confidence was a lifeline. She outlined the steps: temporary restraining order to keep Brandon from the house, emergency spousal support to cover my bills, and a discovery process to uncover any hidden assets. "He's betting you'll be too emotional to fight back," she said. "Let's prove him wrong." I hung up, my pulse racing, not with fear but with purpose. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was taking control. That evening, Claire arrived, her suitcase thumping in the hall as she pulled me into a hug. "You're not alone," she said, her eyes fierce. We sat on the couch, wine glasses in hand, as I showed her the emails. She cursed under her breath, then squeezed my hand. "You're going to bury him, Lil. And I'll be here every step." The next week was a whirlwind of action. Rachel filed the divorce papers, the restraining order was granted, and the forensic accountant, a quiet man named Victor, began tracing the money. He found the wire transfer led to a joint account Brandon had opened with Jessica, using funds from our savings. "It's recoverable," Victor said, his voice steady. "And it strengthens your case for infidelity." I sold Brandon's truck, parked untouched in our driveway, using the money to cover legal fees. The act felt petty but satisfying, a reclaiming of something he'd taken for granted. I also reached out to my boss, explaining I'd need flexibility. She was supportive, adjusting my schedule and offering a referral to a therapist. "You're tougher than you know," she said, and I clung to those words. But it wasn't all forward motion. Nights were the hardest, the silence of the house amplifying my doubts. I'd lie awake, replaying our marriage, searching for the moment it broke. Was it my fault? Had I been too focused on work, on Paris, on the garden? The questions gnawed at me, but I refused to let them win. I started journaling, pouring my anger and grief onto the page, each word a step toward clarity. I also began running, the rhythm of my sneakers on the pavement grounding me, the burn in my lungs a reminder I was still here, still fighting. The turning point came 2 weeks later, when Rachel called with news. "We found something," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "Brandon's been funneling money into a shell company, likely to hide it from you. It's linked to Jessica's name, but he's the primary owner." My jaw dropped. A shell company? Brandon, who struggled with basic bookkeeping, had planned this? "He thought he could outsmart the system," Rachel said. "But we've got him." We're filing for a freeze on those assets and adding fraud to the complaint. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning sun slanting through the window, and felt a shift. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice. I decided to take it further. With Rachel's guidance, I contacted Jessica's employer, a boutique PR firm in Boston. I didn't name names, just sent an anonymous tip about potential misuse of company funds, attaching evidence of the shell company. It was a calculated move, one that could expose Jessica's role without directly implicating me. I also reached out to Brandon's clients, politely informing them his business was under restructuring and recommending competitors. It was ruthless, yes, but so was leaving me at an airport with a note. Each action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, stitching together the woman I'd been before Brandon's betrayal shattered her. The consequences unfolded faster than I expected. Jessica's firm launched an internal investigation, and she was suspended pending review. Brandon's clients began jumping ship, his business crumbling under the weight of his absence and my quiet interference. Rachel's team secured a court order freezing the shell company's assets, and a forensic accountant uncovered more offshore accounts, hidden investments, all in Brandon's name. He was planning to leave you with nothing, Victor said, shaking his head. But you've outmaneuvered him. The divorce proceedings gained traction, with the judge granting me temporary spousal support and ordering Brandon to repay the stolen funds. He tried to fight back, hiring a lawyer who argued I'd entrapped him, but the evidence was ironclad. The emails, the receipts, the bank records, they told a story he couldn't rewrite. Brandon reached out once, a voicemail left at 2 a.m., his voice slurred with whiskey. "You're ruining my life, Lily," he said, the words dripping with self-pity. "I just wanted to be happy. Why can't you let me go?" I didn't respond. His happiness wasn't my responsibility anymore. I deleted the message, the act final, like closing a book. Claire, who'd stayed with me through the worst, cheered when I told her. "He's learning," she said, raising her glass. The aftermath "You don't mess with Lily Carter." The house felt haunted, every corner holding memories of a life that no longer existed. I sold it, trading the garden and creaky floors for a sleek apartment in the city, closer to work, with a balcony overlooking the skyline. The move was bittersweet, but it was mine. I kept a few things, the pottery bowl, the quilt, a single lavender sprig pressed in a book, but left the rest behind. Work became my refuge, my projects earning me a promotion to senior manager, the raise enough to rebuild my savings. I started therapy, unpacking the guilt and grief, learning to trust myself again. Friends rallied around me, Claire and the Patels hosting dinners, my colleagues inviting me to trivia nights. Slowly, the world felt less heavy. Brandon's downfall was quiet but complete. His business collapsed, his clients gone, his reputation tarnished by whispers of fraud. Jessica left him when the money dried up, their new start crumbling under the weight of reality. Last I heard, he was living in a rented studio, working odd jobs, a far cry from the man who'd dreamed of Paris. I didn't gloat, there was no joy in his ruin, only a grim satisfaction that justice had found him. Rachel called one day, her voice bright. "The divorce is finalized," she said. "You're free." Free. The word felt foreign, but it fit. I was free, of him, of his lies, of the weight of a marriage that had never been what I thought. I didn't go to Paris that year. Instead, I took a solo trip to Lisbon, wandering colorful streets, sketching tiled buildings, sipping wine by the Tagus River. The city felt alive, its pulse syncing with mine, a reminder that I could start over. I bought a postcard, a vibrant scene of Alfama's rooftops, and wrote a note to myself, *, you are enough. *, I mailed it home, a promise sealed in ink. Back in Connecticut, I joined an art class, my sketches filling notebooks with dreams I'd set aside. I volunteered at a women's shelter, sharing my story, helping others find their footing. Each step was small, but together, they built a life I loved, a life that was mine. One evening, as I stood on my balcony, the city lights glittering below, my phone buzzed with a text from Claire, *, proud of you, sis. You're unstoppable. *, I smiled, the warmth spreading through me. Brandon had left me at the airport, thinking he'd broken me, but he'd only freed me to become someone stronger, someone whole. I didn't need his approval, his love, or his sticky notes. I had my own. And as I looked out at the skyline, the stars faint but steady above, I knew I'd never let anyone dim my light again. If this journey from betrayal to empowerment moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of unbreakable spirits. Share in the comments, have you ever had to rise above someone's cruelty? Your story could inspire others.